Welcome to Innovating Music, a podcast from the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and the UCLA Center for Music Innovation. I'm your host, Dr. Gigi Johnson. Rehan Choudhry has created both a beautiful perspective as a company to help bring social action into place, as well as is creating the Emerge Las Vegas Festival for the second year in a row. Really interesting, different perspective. As a social innovator around music and social activism, you'll hear how he's put together interesting lifestyle businesses around entertainment to really take a look, though, at ways that how we can change who we are and how we look at the world through getting together around music and other lifestyle events. So he's got a great history of taking a look at this stuff in the leisure industries, in casinos, entertainment, and now how he's bringing this to bear with social activism, returning to somewhat of his college roots, and music. So we have the Emerge Festival that when you hear this will be shortly upcoming. So there's still seats available, but also the whole history of how he got to this space and what is it like now to try to put together a social justice and activism event in our Facebook era. Enjoy this podcast.
In the last several years, there's been just an increased awareness and sense of urgency around minority rights and specifically issues that are plaguing either society or society as a result of issues that are plaguing the planet. And what we wanted to do is create a forum where young professionals could come together and professionals of all ages could come together and be able to celebrate their intent to be a part of positive social change through the lens of this relationship between the social justice industry and the live entertainment community, the live music industry.
So before we continue talking about that, I'd like you to back up. And you have a really interesting background for this. Can you walk us through how you came to this dimension, especially from working in Las Vegas and then working on Life is Beautiful, how you got to this point and your journey to get here?
I mean, my career has been both traditional and non-traditional in a lot of really interesting ways. I think, well, one of the things that has always kind of been consistent is while I was kind of pushing my career just from a more traditional perspective forward, even if it didn't align with the work I was doing, I was always very engaged from a social impact perspective. So I started out my career as an IT consultant for on contract for the Department of Homeland Security. This was right after 9/11. We were developing emergency response communication systems and after the attack. So basically, two things went horribly wrong that day. One, we were horribly attacked, but the second is after the attack, the communication infrastructure collapsed across the country. So really nobody knew who was in charge or how we were making decisions. So our job right out of college was to go in with a team and try to figure that out. I loved the type of work I was doing. It was incredibly meaningful, but I didn't really like the IT space, the computer space. So I left and went to grad school. And while I was in grad school, I kind of got a taste for entrepreneurship and social impact work. I co-founded an organization called Project Pyramid, which is an academic organization that was meant to teach students from across Vanderbilt University's campus ways in which they could create positive change through micro for-profit initiatives in developing or underdeveloped or struggling communities around the world.
What do you mean by micro for-profit initiatives? And what era was this in? What time frame?
Yeah, so this was 2005 to 2007. And around that time, Muhammad Yunus had founded the Grameen Bank and was I think he'd won the Nobel Prize or Nobel Peace Prize around that time for his work in micro lending. But basically, there were a series of journals, books, speeches. Basically, it was like a ton of thought leadership effort circling around the idea that social impact for underdeveloping countries doesn't have to be in the form of charity, but rather if you create for-profit programs, those can, if set up the right way, can create more sustainable solutions and actually be more effective at alleviating poverty and creating sustained growth or sustainable growth in those communities. So that at the time was in the form of micro lending and micro entrepreneurship. So creating startups like teaching women in a community in a village in India how to sew certain types of blankets to be able to then sell on both the local and the global market, or teaching people how to produce local coffee or local supplies or any other kind of local products or services, but be able to teach them the business foundation that they needed to be able to run them as their own entrepreneurial endeavors. Mm-hmm. So what we wanted to do was teach university students across all disciplines that this type of thinking existed, and this new type of model for social activism and social impact was available to them in their careers. I think our broader mission was to try to bridge the gap between doing well and doing good, which today is more commonly referred to as just doing well by doing good. Mm-hmm. So organizations like Tom Shoes, as an example, or Warby Parker, who's and other B Corps whose social impact efforts are kind of built into the DNA of the organization. At the time, that was a relatively new concept. So.
My hat during that time was hung at UCLA's business school, and there was a lot of work with our MBA students in that regard. And so I appreciate that work a lot because it moved a lot of it sprouted a lot of people's later ideas also for what they moved into in their work. And it sounds like that also is part of what it did with you.
Yeah, it absolutely did. I think that with starting an organization like that, and there were a bunch of them, like you had mentioned, cropping up in business schools across the country. I think there's still, at least in my mind, there's still a disconnect between the work I was doing in grad school and what I needed to do to further my career. So when I graduated, I took a job in an industry that was the farthest away from what I was doing in the social impact space. I ended up going to work for the casino industry. I got an offer from Caesars Entertainment to join their management training program out of business school. So I moved to Atlantic City, New Jersey, and spent 4 years learning every aspect of the casino business. And that ended with me running marketing and business development for the Atlantic City region, which comprised 4 casinos and represented about 60% of the hotel inventory in the market. And the good news for my career was I had a ton of autonomy and could be really progressive in the programs I was pioneering. The bad thing about it was I had that autonomy because the company was a bit distracted because we were in the middle of the recession.
Yeah.
The economy had collapsed, and a company that was a Fortune 500 company with over 150,000 employees globally had to shave off 10% of its workforce very, very quickly. And that climbed over the years. The kind of public story is very easily researchable, but basically, like, as the entire country collapsed and the global markets collapsed, hospitality organizations, travel organizations, leisure organizations got hit really hard, and markets like Las Vegas got decimated for a period of time. And that made situations like Atlantic City even worse because the Atlantic City market was already declining. So it was a bleak period of time for everybody. I was fortunate that I was able to keep my job amid mass layoffs. And what I focused my attention on was trying to come up with non-traditional ways to get people to come back to Atlantic City to gamble again. So I founded what ended up becoming the company's lifestyle entertainment program, which basically was a catch-all for any entertainment that wasn't a band performing on stage or a Cirque du Soleil style theatrical show. So anything outside of the traditional entertainment space. So the first event that I founded was a food and wine festival with the Food Network that we hosted with celebrity chefs. We followed that up with a televised tennis exhibition with Venus Williams and Andy Roddick and a number of other kind of well-known tennis players. A figure skating event that was televised with Nancy Kerrigan, some fashion shows. We did Atlantic City's first LGBTQ festival. But these were basically just large scale lifestyle cultural events that were trying to get people to come together for entertainment first, and then kind of discover that Atlantic City was an interesting place that was close by to them to visit.
So ahead of your time in many ways, that's very much both the theme of what you're doing now, but also what's really growing right now in the whole festival space.
Yeah, so we definitely, I mean, for the casino industry, we're way ahead of our time, but yeah, for the broader entertainment community, I mean, I think we're still 5 years off of the fast growth of the festival industry that's kind of defined live entertainment and social culture in the last 10 years. But
so how the heck did you end up at the Cosmopolitan then?
Long story short is we couldn't save the Atlantic City market. There were macroeconomic forces that just needed to play out before they could start rebuilding. But what I was able to do is I caught the attention of the team that Deutsche Bank had hired to finish construction on a foreclosed project in Las Vegas called the Cosmopolitan. It was a $4 billion luxury resort that the original owners had to shutter midway through construction during the recession, and Deutsche Bank had picked up the project and decided to take it out of the graveyard and finish it. So 6 months before the grand opening of the property, I was called, came out to visit, and it turned out they didn't have an entertainment strategy at all. They didn't have a grand opening strategy. So it was the perfect time for somebody that's like me, who's at the time was, and I think even now, highly entrepreneurial and creative, and wanting to wrap my arms around a project that I could have as much autonomy as I could out of. So they hired me out. I moved to Las Vegas and designed the entertainment program for one of the highest performing casino resorts in the country. So we produced a grand opening that year. It was New Year's Eve 2010, and a big showy concert with Jay-Z, Coldplay, Beyonce, John Mayer, Florence and the Machine, and a number of others. Next thing you know, I'm an entertainment director in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is the furthest kind of. I had no idea I was going to end up in that direction. So from a government contractor to the center of Sin City was an interesting transition.
And it's a center you've kind of hung around since, but not, right? So how did you get from that adventure to Life is Beautiful?
Yeah, so I spent 2 full years, and they were great years at the Cosmopolitan. I learned a ton, but there was this there's this itch that I had since grad school where I knew that I wanted to test my hand in entrepreneurship and actually just create something from scratch on my own and see what we could do and see what I could create. So I left the Cosmopolitan in 2012 and went back to my apartment, and I had these floor to ceiling glass windows overlooking the Strip, and I grabbed a bunch of whiteboard markers and I started drawing all over them and coming up with ideas for what I could do. And out of probably 2 months of just isolated brainstorming, came up with the idea for a music and art and impact festival called Life is Beautiful that I wanted to produce in downtown Las Vegas, which at the time was in the very early stages of a rebirth effort led by Zappos co-founder and CEO, Tony Hsieh. People didn't know this at the time, but he was about to invest some of the tune of $500 million in redeveloping that area to try to turn it into the kind of next generation millennial inspired city environment. So something that was a entrepreneurial haven with tech and entertainment and food and beverage and lifestyle programming, etc. So I drew up this plan for this festival and started showing it to a couple friends, trying to see what they thought. And one of them, it was my second meeting, was like, "Yeah, I want to introduce you to my boss." And a couple weeks later, I'm sitting down with Tony Shea and his team, and we had what amounted to like an hour and a half long meeting. And at the end of the meeting, he decided that this was the project that he wanted to partner on. So he funded the project, and we were kind of off to the races. So that was summer of 2012. And we ended up producing the first year of that festival in the fall of 2013. And in 4 short years, the festival was named Festival of the Year by Polestar magazine, which is the big industry publication. And I think is the 6th or 7th largest music festival in the country right now.
I've only gone once. I went last year and had a great time, though I appreciated all the shady spots.
Yeah.
Darn warm. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, Vegas is not a cool city.
Well, it is at this time.
It's a cool city, but it's not a choice.
So you then transitioned out of that though into your current set of adventures?
I started Life is Beautiful with the intention of creating a lifestyle entertainment festival that championed stories of positivity and resilience in an effort to help young people work through or be inspired to work through some of the issues that they were dealing with at the time. And this is a story that not many people know about, but at the time, the suicide rates for millennials were climbing higher and faster than any other living generation on the planet. And that was a terrifying prospect. And I think before I'd really honed the brand and the storyline for Life is Beautiful, I was at a festival in Chicago, and sitting in a field with 90,000 people between the ages of 14 and 28 years old, and noticing that there wasn't a single booth or station or conversation going on site to help people who need it. And at the time, the statistics were like 1 in 14 people within that age range were going to attempt suicide during those years. So that was terrifying for me. So I basically built the entire Life is Beautiful brand around the idea that we wanted to celebrate and share stories of resilience, but basically celebrate people who were able to successfully work through social issues in an effort to raise awareness for them, but also normalize the idea that like everyone deals with this stuff. While we all are unique individually, the situations that we're going through, the challenges that we go through in life, as much as we'd like to believe are unique, they're really not. These issues are lumped into broader categories. So it's addiction, it's depression, it's mental health, it's abuse, it's dealing with traumatic experiences, it's dealing with post-traumatic stress or severe depression or bipolar issues, whatever it may be. But the idea is if we can create a forum where people can comfortably talk about them, that's step one. And on site, we had something that's anywhere between 25 and 35 different nonprofit organizations represented, most of them dealing with a wide range of these issues that lead to severe depression and ultimately lead to the increasing suicide rate. So we were trying to do our part.
Plus bringing together food and art and other uplifting elements to go with that.
Yeah, the idea was like, can you highlight all of the pieces of life that make the world so engaging and interesting and fun, but not ignore what's happening in the world, but rather highlight it and literally put your heart on your sleeve. I mean, that's what our original logo for Life is Beautiful was a splattered bleeding heart of sorts. So to answer your question, I ended up leaving Life is Beautiful for a number of reasons, but one of the primary ones was I wanted to continue that storyline. I wanted to continue to move closer and closer to bridging my entrepreneurial objectives with my social impact interests and my social activism interests, and make those one storyline, which I couldn't do under the Life is Beautiful brand. So I left and I started A Beautiful Perspective, which has basically been like an incubator of sorts for social impact and activism led business ideas in the entertainment space. So we founded this festival called Emerge that's taking place in Las Vegas next week. We started a morning series called Activist Mornings in New York that we piloted at the end of last year. We were bridging together live entertainment with emerging thought leaders around social impact spaces, really focused on minority interests.
Mm-hmm.
We had a media platform we were producing a ton of content out of to try to just raise awareness for this next generation of thought leaders around social issues.
How do you define social issues? Because the reason I ask the question is it depends on where you're standing, right? As to what, and both my center at UCLA and my think tank outside of UCLA works on this stuff a lot out here in the LA area, in that depending on where you stand, you have both a different set of social issues, and some of it is getting other people to head in the same direction as you or change the world around you. But then everyone's got a different lens, objective, and different ways that they're activating people to take action in the world, or in some sad cases, getting people to not take action in the world. So for what you're trying to build, what is social action, and how are you fertilizing the areas of social action that you're trying to then grow?
I have this conversation quite often of like where we stand in the picture, because I think more often than not right now, people want to know which team you're on. And I think one of the challenges is we're not on teams anymore. We're kind of trying to force through our own perspectives. And I think what you said, or the way you framed your question, was dead on. That one, the idea of social issues that any issue that we are, or any challenge that we, as either communities or individuals or races or genders, whatever they may be, that are limiting our ability to progress, or limiting our ability to grow, either individually or as a community, I think are areas that we tend to focus on. I can't say that we don't take a liberal perspective on things, because we do. But I think for us, it's issues that involve one, helping people, like individuals, work through the challenges that they're facing. So whether it's victims of abuse or victims of addiction, poverty, recovering from hate crimes, whatever it may be. So like outside inflicted or self-inflicted pain or trauma that people need to work through, I think is one area that we choose to focus on. But another area is our individual rights and our community rights, this march towards an equal world where we are all represented correctly, and we all are at least given the same opportunities, or at least the limitations or the barriers to those opportunities are removed.
So I tend to be, when I put on my cynical hat, I tend to think that in some ways putting things together right now is finding like-minded or not like-minded souls and making them realize that there's a great opportunity they can participate in. So you're starting something new, but engaging with people in communities they already are in. How are you growing a new festival? How are you finding like-minded or adjacent-minded souls and convincing them to come and engage together in Las Vegas in a week?
So for us, I think the difficult thing that we're doing is we're trying to create a forum for a number of different topics. So at our event, we have speakers and performers that are going to be representing transgender rights, women's rights, gun reform, prison reform, climate change, depression, mental health, working through illness, etc. So for us, it's being able to identify the kind of stakeholders or constituents that are representing each topic, and trying to bring them in and create a forum in which you're entering the room with an incredible amount of insight and experience based on your association to one topic or one community, but then applying the learnings, the insights, the perspectives that you have onto helping the broader community solve their issues and being able to create a collaborative conversation. So in a lot of ways, it's trying to break down the kind of siloed barriers that we've created as a result of like the way social media is facilitated or kind of changed the way we converse with each other digitally.
Yeah.
It's trying to create opportunities where we can put like-minded people in the same room, even though they don't necessarily consider themselves advocates for each other's causes.
Hmm.
It's understanding that the tools that are required to be successful in each one of these areas are very similar to each other. So for us, it's more of an academic forum and an educational forum than it is a festival or a party. So it's why I kind of say we're a hybrid of the two. What we wanted to do was show diverse leaders in each one of these spaces. So I think one of the things that bothers me the most about how we're consuming entertainment is when people use the line "shut up and sing." That was kind of stapled to the Girls from Dixie chicks back during the Bush era, but now it's applied more and more because we like music has always been representative of the world that we're trying one, representative of the lives that people are living today, but also the world that we're trying to make together.
Hmm.
So this
Yeah.
notion that musicians don't have a say is crazy to me. So the very literal example of what we're doing is like Laura Jane Grace, who's the lead singer of a punk rock band called Against Me, who's incredibly well known in that space, is also an iconic transgender front woman who has transitioned over the last few years. So to see her get on stage and do a solo acoustic set of the songs that you know and love, and then being able to hear her talk about her advocacy work in the transgender space, or Talib Kweli, who's an incredibly well-known musician, hip-hop artist, talking about his work in prison reform. I think creating a forum in which young people can see that activists and people working towards social progress take familiar forms that are a bit unexpected could be incredibly eye-opening. So we're experimenting here. I mean, we're in our second year of this event, and it feels like we're just starting it. So I think I'll be able to answer a lot of these questions a little bit better once we get through the event. We have a couple more years under our belt, but we're effectively trying to get people together to talk about the issues that we feel matter most in any given year. And the goal is to expand the number of topics that we cover each year and expand the amount of talent that we cover. But always make it a kind of collaborative, high energy environment, if that makes sense.
You're in New York now. Why Las Vegas? Is it because it is a space that's welcoming to doing a festival or way easy to get to? What makes Las Vegas the right space for this?
Yeah, so my wife and I lived in Las Vegas for 7 years, and we were very much a part of the community here and represented the way that the community was evolving in very positive ways. We live in New York City now, which I love, and that's home. But I think when we were thinking about building this event, the event just in isolation is meant to be representative of a wide range of issues that humans are facing locally, nationally, and globally. So what we wanted was a location that similarly represented all of the issues that we were tackling on the ground level. So it had representation of the issues that we're facing in probably more serious ways. And the thing with Las Vegas is people have a tendency to focus solely on the 40 plus million annual tourists that come into the city and the glitz and the glamour. But what they don't realize is the city in any given year is 48, 49, or 50 out of 50 in education. The transgender community in the city is living challenged lives and often forced into or living in the low income kind of like seedy underbelly of the prostitution led underbelly of the city. There's an entire underground city of homeless individuals that are either living in tent communities or literally living underground in tunnels under the city. We've got a community of people in the city that love their state, they love Las Vegas, and they want to see this place grow and mature and become a better version of itself. And it doesn't hurt that in any given year, Vegas Nevada's a battleground state. So like during election cycles, the amount of the number of politicians that come in here and do big platform speeches and then leave, make it an interesting space for us. It's more politically charged than I think a lot of people give it credit for. So I think we're here because we love this city, and I know the city really well. I was part of the community, and I do believe that something like this event coming out of San Francisco would have made sense and would have felt familiar and easy. But we're not trying to do something that's easy. We're trying to do something that makes an impact. So building it out of an unexpected space like the heart of the Las Vegas Strip, I think was really exciting for us.
Is there anything better, since you've started so many different things over time? Is there anything better in the current technological world? And I know that you're not a technology story. You're much more of a social transformation and innovation story, which I adore. But is there anything about now that makes this easier or harder to do than your different things you've started in the past?
This is harder than anything I've done in the past. It's harder for a number of reasons. So one is the way we promote events has fundamentally changed over the last 10, not even 10 years, like 5 years. Traditional advertising has become relatively ineffective and replaced by Facebook, which in any given year is changing the rules in which you can utilize the platform to connect with audiences.
Almost weekly.
What's that? Yeah,
Almost
almost
weekly.
weekly. So to be a concert or a festival or an entertainment promoter in the space where you used to be able to do full page ads in newspapers and magazines, do radio advertising and billboards, and that would sell your tickets. Now all of a sudden this like elusive digital social universe is your only vehicle to reach your audience. And even then, in any given day or week, to your point, you don't know whether you're able to do that effectively or not. So I think that's challenge number one is we're working with a platform that literally it changes. It's like if you were advertising in Vogue, and in any given week, it's, well, we're a magazine this week. Now we're a digital platform. Now we're not talking about fashion anymore. Now we're talking about sports. And it just makes it very difficult. So I think that's number one. Number two is we're a politically charged entertainment platform. And because of what happened in the 2016 election, and because of the heat that Facebook is getting, they're like, I don't know how to describe this well without being terrible to them, but they're
being reactive.
yeah,
Maybe that's
incredibly reactive. So what's happened is all of our advertising, because we have Emma Gonzalez as a speaker, is getting flagged, and we're forcibly limited in the audience we're able to reach, which was something we didn't find out till halfway through our like marketing cycle, which is really scary because we're not, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to target fake news, and they're trying to target like politically charged blogs. But we're a conference and festival, so being limited already by having to use a platform that's changing constantly, and then being further filtered because of the nature of our content has been really an interesting battle to deal with. And it's not like you're dealing with a local magazine where you can call up the publisher, because they don't even understand the rules that are kind of playing out at any given moment. So that's, I think, issue number two. And I think the third issue is it's funny. Adam Grant in his book Originals called out that people on the same side of an issue will have a tendency to attack each other more viciously than people on opposite sides of the issue. So like vegans and vegetarians will fight to the death, ignoring meat eaters, just as like a just lame kind of basic example. So the idea that like we are on one side of the fence, right? So I can't look at anybody and say that we're not a more liberal and more kind of like progressive in our minds organization, to see that like nobody's really got, there's no kind of shared perspective on how to solve for these issues, and we're almost even further divided within our kind of camps. So that's been interesting too, of the feedback of like, well, I'm glad that you're advocating for gun reform, but I don't think that person that you're bringing in is the right advocate.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a challenge, because I think from our perspective, hey, look, we just all want to solve the issue.
Yeah, getting people together to talk between issues, which is sounds like your core theme, is harder and harder in many communities, and you're trying to actually bring it together more intentionally, and running into all the roadblocks.
Yeah, that is exactly. That's very well stated. So, look, I am incredibly optimistic because if you look at the last 15 years of live entertainment development, the largest festivals in the world were not ticketed music festivals. They were protests. It was the Million Women. It was the Women's March. It was March for Our Lives.
Or I would say protests or fundraisers, right? So
Yeah,
even the examples of Live Aid and other things, that there was a, do this, come do this, and the funds from it will go directly to do X. And this is in a world now where people think that liking something on Facebook is social activism. You're doing something that's trying to then have what as the follow-on. And I ask this as we're kind of coming to the close of this great conversation, but what can people do at your event to then be follow-on, and I'm assuming that there might still be tickets, but maybe not.
no,
I don't
there are.
know. Okay, so I'll ask in a second for how people find out, but also a lot of people will be listening to this over the next couple of years. How can people get engaged or follow up in what you're doing, and what's kind of the call to action from your event into the world?
Yeah, so I think step number one is if anyone wants to look up the event or attend the event, all the information is at emergelv.com. And the event's in just over a week, or a week to this day. And there are definitely still tickets available, limited number, but they're available. I think our objective is, and I've said this a few times, we're an educational platform. So I think for us, it's one, coming into the event with an open mind that you have your perspective, and yes, you have your way of being a part of like the activism community or the movement, but being open to the idea that there are other ways to get involved, and often the learnings or the tools that you're going to use that can ultimately be the most effective in your kind of personal path can come from the work that people are doing in other areas that you may not necessarily be involved in. So if you're an advocate of gun reform, and that's what you're championing, going in and listening to a conversation with the leaders of Planned Parenthood, for example, and try to figure out how they respond in light of these kind of like movements within conservative states to overturn abortion rights and the right to choose. But being able to listen to that conversation, understanding the tactics that they're employing, often we'll be able to find some kind of interesting tools to be able to apply into our core areas of interest. But then also understanding that focus is a great thing, but there are so many issues that need to be addressed, and there's so many kind of micro movements that are out there, raising awareness for them and being constantly aware of not just the issues from a likes and retweets perspective, but actually understanding your community, what organizations are in place, what leaders are in place, and what, as a result, when you're making your decisions to align with nonprofit organizations, who do you work with? Who do you donate your time to charity-wise? Who do you donate your money to? But then more importantly, coming up in these election cycles, who do you vote for?
And whose stories do you listen to? That you're, in many ways, this is a storytelling
It really
exercise.
is. And there's so many great programs out there and tours out there of people, like organizations like ours, creating platforms for people to tell their stories. But I think one of the things that scares me a bit is because of like the social media movement, we're not able to humanize these issues as much as we once did. So the more stories that can be told, and the more you can hear about an issue and know the voices behind it, I think that's an incredible piece of the puzzle. But ultimately, like, what we're trying to do is educate and empower our attendees through our community to take action around the issues, and we'll focus their attention on very specific ways to get involved. But then ultimately, when they leave the event, it's their responsibility to get involved at a community level, and we'll facilitate that part of the conversation in any way that we can.
And all of this intertwined with music. Any last comments you'd like to share with our audience? I know you've mentioned a couple artists, Laura Jane Grace, and I think Tully Qualley. Any other folks that are playing or people that you suggest people follow, and any other things that you would like us to think about?
Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of different artists that I think people should pay attention to. So, like, some of them are unknowns and some of them are really well known. So, I mean, one of the more well known on the lineup is Brandon Flowers, who's the lead singer of The Killers, and he's doing a special performance of the song "Land of the Free," which was their protest song, and it's the first time The Killers have ever done a protest song. And their music video was filmed by Spike Lee and got incredible reviews. But he's going to be doing a special performance of that song and giving some insight into how they put that together and why. So that's number one. I mean, another one is Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg, who are both Parkland shooting survivors. They're going to have they're doing individual speeches, but they're also doing a conversation on stage together about their experience and their role in the March for Our Lives movement. And then we've got some unknowns, like we've got Weldon Angelos, who's speaking this year. He was carrying a pound of cannabis and was arrested and sentenced to 55 years in prison. President Obama pardoned him before leaving office. So now he's an advocate for prison reform, justice reform, specifically in the cannabis space. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an incredible weekend of just interesting storytelling, live performances, and great kind of collaborative conversations.
Cool. Any last words as we
No,
wrap up?
thank you for the time. This was wonderful, and I mean, we're just one event in Las Vegas, but there are a ton of these types of events that are cropping up around the country. So I recommend people kind of look for the ones that make sense to them. But sharing of stories on individual experiences within a lot of these social topics are incredible ways to just humanize the issues. And we're just doing our part, but I hope people can come out and check out the event.
Thank you for joining us. Best of luck. Stay healthy. And thank you for sharing your stories of social innovation with music and with community, with our community. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Well, that wraps up this podcast. Many thanks to the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music and the UCLA Center for Music Innovation for being our hosts of this ongoing series. You can subscribe to us in all the usual places, or you can come find us at innovation.schoolofmusic.ucla.edu. Join us again to follow the other adventures that we will be tracking down in innovating music. Thanks again.